Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I am so excited. There are just under, I think, 400 participants today in our first 1383 implementation monthly webinar. I was just speaking with the team. I can't thank you all enough for joining us. As we are the day after America Recycles Day, I spent a lot of time yesterday contemplating the work that we do at CalRecycle, the work we're doing for the state of California with all of you. And the theme that popped up all throughout the day yesterday and last night and this morning for me was what incredible partnerships that we are building. And 1383 implementation has been such a wonderful example of the partnerships that we can build and what we can successfully accomplish when we work together. So this webinar is really meant to be an open forum to bring challenges and questions and have an open conversation about how do we get where we're going. And I have every faith that when we're working together, we're going to get to the goals that the legislature set out for us in 1383 and beyond. And so really, again, can't thank all of you enough for joining us today. As I think you're aware, we are going to be doing this on a monthly basis. And again, it will be once a month for a couple of hours to bring open questions and comments so we can really cultivate that relationship and partnership in the implementation of our organics recycling goals. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And with that, I will pass it back over to Zoe.
Thank you so much, Rachel. And good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining today. We have a lot to share with you. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Ray, who will provide some intros and housekeeping as to how we're going to conduct today's webinar.
Thank you, Zoe. Let me go ahead and begin by sharing my screen. Excuse me one second. So as Zoe mentioned, my name is Ray Carranza. I'm an environmental scientist here at CalRecycle, and we'll be going over some of the logistics of this meeting as well as the Q&A session. One second. Everyone can see the slides. Welcome to our SB 1383 chat with CalRecycle. I just want to give a quick reminder on how the final question and answer session will go. To ask a question via the Zoom platform, please type your questions into the chat pane. Once called upon, please unmute yourself and state your name and affiliation when asked by CalRecycle staff. If you cannot unmute, you may submit your questions to slcp.organics@calrecycle.ca.gov. We ask that you please be mindful of time. We would like to give as many people as possible the opportunity to participate. Here are some of the department resources relating to SB 1383. Please be sure to subscribe to our SLCP listserv to get the latest information and tools that can be accessed through this first link or by going to the CalRecycle website and searching listserv in the search bar. We will also be sending out save the dates for upcoming 1383 webinars soon. The topics of these will include commercial and multi-family programs, edible food recovery, funding, and other implementation resources. And with that, I will pass to Michelle Martin, who will discuss funding.
Thanks so much, Ray. Good afternoon, everyone. I have a lot to share today, and I wanted to provide a status of some of CalRecycle's circular economy allocations and programs associated with them. First, I wanted to start off with this allocation chart. Ray, if you can get to the next slide. Thank you. CalRecycle was appropriated $270 million that was allocated in fiscal year 21-22 and 22-23 to support a circular economy and implementation goals of SB 1383. An additional $190 million was allocated in September of this year by the legislature from the Greenhouse Gas Reduction Fund, $180 million for 1383 implementation to local jurisdictions, and $10 million for co-digestion projects. And I will highlight some of those programs today. The first program is the Community Composting for Green Spaces grant. This is a competitive grant program created to increase the number of community groups operating small-scale composting programs, supporting green spaces within priority population communities. Green spaces include community gardens, urban farms, and other public spaces where small-scale composting is appropriate. This effort will also increase local composting capacity while expanding community knowledge about the benefits of compost use and proper composting techniques. Funds provide compost and trees to enhance green spaces, grow fresh produce, and support neighborhood local soil health, access to green spaces, and food. Additionally, this grant provides funds for employment and training opportunities for priority population communities. The application for this program is currently closed. Applications were due November 3rd, and awards are currently scheduled for February of 2023. $4.24 million is available for this program. For this cycle, we divided the state into 8 regions. CalRecycle will fund one applicant per region to implement a project that supports community composting sites throughout their region. Each region is provided a base amount of $300,000, and regions with residents of a disadvantaged community will receive an increase in their allocation from the remaining funds for the program proportionate to the percentage of disadvantaged community residents living within that region. The total amount available for these grants was $4.75 million. However, we set aside $510,000 for a separate cycle available specifically for California Native American tribes with a focus on lands within their control. The application for the Community Composting for Green Spaces California Native American Tribe Cycle is tentatively scheduled to be released in May of 2023. The next program is the Organics Grant Program. This program supports composting and anaerobic digestion projects. As we all know, this is critical infrastructure and will assist with successful SB 1383 implementation throughout the state. We received $105 million for the next 2 fiscal years for this program. We were able to immediately allocate $31 million to applicants that were eligible but not funded from the 2020 Organics Grant Program solicitation. We made 12 awards in February, and the remaining $71 million will be in a new grant solicitation, along with 5.5 in remaining funds from the new co-digestion allocation. We plan to present a draft eligibility and scoring criteria in the next several weeks with a presentation at the December public meeting, and we plan to release applications in early 2023. And this next slide shows a list of grants that have been funded over the last several years that totals approximately $31 million. Okay, and so the next program is the Recycling Market Development Zone Loan Program. This program is designed to stimulate the use of post-consumer waste materials and secondary waste materials generated in California as raw materials used as feedstock by private business, industry, and commerce. Priority funding will be given to projects for circular recycling programs that result in a product being recycled into a product that is also recyclable or has a minimum lifespan of 10 or more years. This is a revolving loan fund, and there's over $32 million available. Applications are accepted on a continuous basis. The next program I wanted to highlight is the Edible Food Recovery Grant Program. The need for this type of program has increased significantly because of the pandemic, and the positive impacts to communities are immediate. 1 in 5 Californians are hungry, and 1.8 billion meals worth of still edible food ends up in landfills annually. We awarded 21 eligible food recovery projects totaling over $5 million. So I wanted to provide an example. CalRecycle awarded the food bake of Contra Costa in Solano, just under $300,000. This award has funded the purchase of a hybrid box truck for picking donated food up, 7 pallet jacks to expedite loading and storing recovered food, as well as cold storage enhancements to other equipment to support their operations. Since May of 2019, this grantee has recovered over 1.3 million pounds of edible food and distributed to Californians in need. Many of you are familiar with the SB 1383 Local Assistance Grant Program. $60 million was allocated for this program in fiscal year 21-22 that supports local governments with 1383 implementation. Eligible projects include collection, education and outreach, edible food recovery, capacity planning, procurement, just to name a few. 476 applications were received for this solicitation. First round awards were approved in April for jurisdictions who met the application requirements and adopted a local enforcement ordinance by April 1st. Second round of awards were approved in August, and jurisdictions have 2 years to complete their projects. As I mentioned earlier, an additional $180 million was allocated for 1383 implementation, and the criteria and timelines are still to be determined and developed. And this slide represents our implementation guideline for a circular economy package. As you can see, our team went straight to work to roll out and get the funds out as quickly as possible. And in closing, I wanted to provide a contacts list. Please use these links to reach out to our staff. You can also visit our funding page for details for all of our funding opportunities. And I will turn it back to Ashley. Thank you. Or Ray.
Thank you. Yes, I think we're going to go ahead and go into a Q&A session to address any funding questions. Esmeralda?
Yeah, so the first question that we got in the chat was from Chuck White. You can unmute yourself and ask your question relating to the Air Resource Board. So you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Yes, I should be unmuted now. The question I asked and has been asked several times is what, for example, at the last monthly meeting, I think Evan Edgar got up and suggested that there needs to be better an expanded collaboration between CalRecycle and the Air Resources Board. The Air Resources Board is in the process of revising and coming up with new regulations for the low carbon fuel standard, which is absolutely essential to stimulate and encourage through an incentive program the production of renewable natural gas from waste materials, including solid waste, forest waste, and agricultural waste. Your focus, of course, is on municipal solid waste to get it out of landfills to reduce that methane generation. And this is an absolutely essential program. CARB, I have met recently with CARB and CARB staff rather, and they are concerned that they want to see renewable natural gas expanded to other uses, not just transportation fuels, and which is fine. I agree with that, but they would, in order to make that happen, they're talking about possibly reducing the use of the low carbon fuel standard as an incentive program for transportation fuels. And that would be a huge mistake in my view, and that CalRecycle should also do everything possible to work with your sister agency to make sure the low carbon fuel standard is maintained, to provide an incentive to pull organic waste out of the solid waste stream to produce the lowest carbon fuels that are available in California. And so that's really my issue, and I'll keep raising it all the way through the adoption of the new LCFS regulations, because it's absolutely, in my view, very, very critical to your mission. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Chuck. Excuse me. Thanks, Chuck. You know, I think it's critical to all of our missions that we figure out how we're going to recycle and utilize our recycled organic waste. And we are in ongoing conversations with the board. And, you know, I know this is an issue of great interest to our new Secretary Garcia Gonzalez as well. So this is really important. We agree with you that it's really important. We are one piece of a very large scoping plan, as you know, and the Air Board has an incredible task in front of it to make sure that we across all of our industries meet the objectives, our climate objectives. And so we are in ongoing conversations with them and just continue to encourage you and our industry partners and our local government partners to also be communicating with the board your concerns. But just thank you for raising it. But I don't want to get too much into AB 32 and climate today, because we could have an entire webinar on that. But I want to make sure in terms of overall implementation, everybody is getting their questions addressed.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that.
Thanks.
Thank you, Rachel. Before going on to the next question, we just would like to share with you that the PowerPoint and Chuck, you may want to turn off your camera. Thank you. So before we get to the next question, let me start my video. We would like to let you know that the PowerPoint will be made available as well as the webinar once we make them ADA compliant. With that, we'll go to Laura Ferrante's question. Laura, you are unmuted on our end. If you could go ahead and unmute yourself, state your name and affiliation, and ask your question regarding technology grants.
Yeah, hi, Laura Ferrante with the Resource Recovery Coalition of California. I just want to know the status of the technology grants. I think the technology feasibility grants. I can't remember off the top of my head how much money was allocated to that program. But just a status update, please.
Sure, I can take that one. I believe it was 10 million that was allocated. I'll have to check on that. But there's been a slight delay. That part of the governor's budget last year was to create an Office of Innovation, and there's been just a delay in creating that office, and that office will head up this program. We're hoping to have criteria developed within the next several months and put that out to the public to comment. I'm not sure if Rachel or Zoe want to add to that, but thank you.
The next question is coming from Daniel Morales. You are unmuted on our end. If you want to unmute yourself and ask your question about DoD installations. Okay, well, their question in the chat was if there was any info on how CalRecycle is supporting DoD installations.
All right, sorry about that. Hey, thanks so much for the question. I really appreciate it. We have been interacting with DoD facilities quite a lot. We've done some webinars. We're connected with a number of the bases, provided some support materials through MyCuber. So if you have any specific needs, please feel free to put your contact information in the chat. We would be glad to follow up. But I have to be honest, I'm really pleased with all the hard work that the various bases have been doing to gear up. We've had a number of bases that have submitted waiver requests that we have been in the process of approving. So those are bases that have some areas that are low population, so they're not subject to the collection requirements. So a lot of great work happening there. So let us know if that helped answer your question. Thanks.
Thank you, Tara. Our next question is from Craig Cassell. Craig, you can go ahead and unmute yourself, state your name and affiliation, and ask your question.
Hi, my name is Craig Sissel. I'm Deputy Director for Butte County at the Neal Road Recycling and Waste Facility. I'm seeing a lot of bad information coming from CalRecycle, I like to call it, where there's not a lot of information. Seems like your organization likes to say how well facilities are performing now without any back information. So like you state, Contra Costa did about $1 million or 1 million pounds recycling. What was that like prior to SB 1383? Are they operating status quo? Has there been a 50% increase that they've done to reach these 1 million pounds? Or is 1 million pounds what they were doing prior to SB 1383? You don't really provide a backstory on that to say, where they've come to, where they're going to. It's just, it's like a feel-good feeling. Hey, they've done 1 million pounds. Well, if that's their status quo, there's no change. There's no, SB 1383 hasn't really done anything. So from a lot of us that are in rural counties, that Contra Costa has been operating in that space for a number of years prior to SB 1383. And so to me, to see that kind of goes, well, that's what they were doing status quo already. SB 1383 hasn't really changed much. So that's kind of my comment, that when you're presenting these facts, it'd be nice to have a little backstory to see where people came from to where we're going, instead of just I could cite information from the Bay Area. Well, the Bay Area has been pulling this material out of its waste stream for a number of years. They're way ahead of a lot of us in aspects. So when you cite their information, it's kind of bad information, because that's where they've been for a number of years, instead of, a rural county who didn't have this program in place and where they're at right now to show a benefit. So thank you.
Hey, Craig, thank you for your comment. I think, from my perspective as director, I'm celebrating all of the successes. We recognize that this program is incredibly challenging, and a little bit of a transition that is necessary. And we've had that acknowledgement from the legislature and the governor with the passage of SB 619. We've had that acknowledgement through the budget appropriations that have been provided to help us assist local governments in their implementation of 1383. So I hear you. I hear your frustration on the part of Butte County. And, I do want to emphasize, we celebrate all of the successes, because we are just so incredibly proud of what everybody is accomplishing, and what they continue to try to grow from, and how they continue to try to make progress. If Butte County is having specific challenges, we recognize that rural counties have a different challenge in front of them than our urban counties. And I know Kara and her entire team are here to help with that local assistance. But I hear your frustration, but I do want to emphasize for everybody on this call that all of our successes are worth celebrating.
Okay, the next question is coming from Kanya Vivanti from City of Lakewood. If you could unmute yourself and ask your question.
Good afternoon. Thank you. My name is Konya Vivanti, Environmental Programs Manager for the City of Lakewood. I recall that there was a second amount of funds that the legislature had approved for the jurisdictions for SB 1383 implementation. I just kind of wanted to get an update as to where CalRecycle was on that process. Thank you.
Yes, thank you for that question. And you're correct, there was 180 million allocated this year for local assistance. And we're in the process of developing the criteria for that funding. We've heard a lot from all of our stakeholders. We're hearing more today about what those needs are. And we're matching that with where we are in implementation. We're about to enter year 2 of 1383 implementation. So we're looking at ways in which to fill some of those gaps. What does this next phase of implementation look like? What are those needs that we're hearing from you all on the ground? And how do we develop criteria to meet those needs? So it's in development, and we will have some updates at our at these meetings and also at our monthly public meetings in the coming months.
Thank you. Our next question is from Rachel Monaco. Rachel, if you could go ahead and unmute yourself, state your name, affiliation, and ask your question regarding long-term funding.
Hi, my name is Rachel Monaco. I'm with Second Harvest of Silicon Valley. We're the regional food bank covering San Mateo and Santa Clara counties. I just wanted to ask if CalRecycle had any plans, whether it's legislative or otherwise, to address a long-term funding solution for food recovery organizations. You mentioned some of the grants that you had available and used Contra Costa and Solano Food Bank as an example of a grantee, gave some great examples of some one-off funding items such as pallet jacks, support for their other transportation needs. But those are one-time funds to address what is ultimately a long-term need. You can give someone a truck, but you still have to put gas in that truck. You still have to have a driver for that truck. There's maintenance, all of that. So I'm just wondering if there's any plans from CalRecycle to support the long-term success of food recovery organizations in order to ensure that this rescued food is going to individuals who are food insecure.
Hey, I'll start, Zoe, and then maybe you can chime in. Rachel, thank you so much for that point. You know, the regulations were designed with respect to planning for capacity for jurisdictions to look at long-term, how are they going to fund this infrastructure? So certainly the legislature has provided this shot in the arm, right, with some initial funding to get that infrastructure built and going. But the jurisdictions, and what I'm seeing across the state is a lot when it comes to edible food, that there's regional collaboration with the county and the individual cities, really thinking and planning for a long-term infrastructure for edible food and how that's going to be funded. And I don't know that everybody has the answer right now, but there's a lot of work going on. The first big hurdle that the jurisdictions had to get over was really just trying to assess how much capacity is available and how much capacity is needed and what's going to be needed when we move into, say, adding in the tier 2 commercial edible food generators. So most of the jurisdictions have completed that important planning exercise. And I know just from a lot of the communication I've had from jurisdictions, this regional effort is starting to happen. Number of counties and jurisdictions are starting to have grant programs to help continue funding some of the edible food infrastructure. Some jurisdictions, for example, like LA City, has built in long-term funding through the franchise agreement. So I think this is a space that's going to continue to develop, but I think we're on our path to really planning for the capacity that's needed. And I think as a part of the capacity planning efforts, we've seen that there's capacity that's available as well, and really utilizing that capacity. Zoe, do you want to add on?
Thank you, Kara. That was perfect. The only other thing that I'll add is we really want to utilize these sessions as an opportunity for peer sharing too. So as Kara mentioned, there are some jurisdictions and counties that are being creative as to looking at these long-term funding sustainability options and encourage more of that discussion. Maybe not today, but as we're developing agendas for future webinars where we can build that in. And the other thing is understanding this isn't long-term funding, but we have heard the need for thinking about ways in which we could fund additional capacity as it relates to food recovery for this next 180 million that we'll be getting out the door. So it's in consideration as we're developing the criteria. Rachel, thank you so much for that question.
Yeah, and Rachel, one last plug I want to put in. Our February webinar, we're going to focus on edible food recovery. So we'll be sure to make note of that. And maybe we can have some of our jurisdictions talk about some of their thoughts on long-term funding. So just wanted to put a plug in for that February webinar.
The next question is coming from Jennifer Rodriguez about a facilities list. Jennifer, if you would like to unmute yourself, introduce yourself, and then ask your question.
Hi, yes, thank you. My name is Jennifer Rodriguez. I'm calling from LA County Public Works, and we've actually been working with other departments within the county, and they've been asking us for resources for where they can obtain SB 1383 compliant compost and mulch. And I did see that on the website we have, or you all shared the Find a Composter link that I shared in my question. And so it's like a two-part question. Is there going to be a different list that will be generated, or is this the only resource that will be shared? And if so, are all the facilities that come up on that Find a Composter tool providing SB 1383 compliant mulch and compost? Thank you.
Hey, thank you, Jennifer, so much. Actually, I don't know if Leo is on, but oh yes, Leo's there. So Leo, we're gonna go ahead and unmute you. We've been working with Zero Foodprint, and they have got a great tool that, I don't know, Leo, are you close to releasing it or ready to release? Let's share that.
We're ready. We're ready. Thanks, Carol. We've been working As you mentioned, we've been working together, which has been really productive. I just shared in the chat a link to our website, and on the bottom of that page, you'll see both a map where you can actually open that up in a separate site and type either your zip code or your county, wherever you are, to see sort of geographically what's around you. And there's also a list of compliant facilities. So we've been working with CalRecycle to understand what features of the Swiss database essentially allow for compliant facilities. It does not mean that every product that they provide is compliant, but all compliant products will come from one or some of these facilities. So it's an interactive map as well as a list that you can manipulate to see kind of where you are, search by zip code, etc., or download and use yourself. And it's all based on CalRecycle's information. I'll also put my email in the chat and happy to discuss offline with anybody about that.
Thanks so much, Leo. We appreciate it. All your hard work.
Thank you.
Thank you both. Our next question comes from Basil C. If you could go ahead and unmute yourself, state your name and affiliation. The floor is yours.
Hi, my name is Basil Cantu. I'm the recycling program analysis for the city of Corona. My question is regarding our capacity plan or implementation plan, I guess. We submitted a revised capacity plan that met all of our capacity goals, and we're just wondering if we'll be getting an update with that regarding to see if we're still in a shortfall.
Hey, Basil, thank you so much. I apologize if you haven't been contacted by your local assistance liaison. We did recently receive that information from County of LA on the updates and those jurisdictions that are no longer needing to submit implementation schedules. So we'll be sure to do a follow-up specifically with you. Does that sound okay?
Yes, that is. Thank you. Sorry, I was trying to mute myself. I wasn't letting
No
me.
worries.
Thank you so much.
I totally
Thank
understand.
You.
Thanks.
Thank you.
The next question is coming from Ashley Brunier. You're unmuted. If you would like to go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
Thank you. I actually think it was already answered in the previous. It was just about the next, the grant cycle for the 180 million, but it sounds like that's still underway.
Thank you. Next question is from Casey Bartholomew. Casey, you can go ahead and unmute yourself, state your name, affiliation, and ask your question.
Hi, good afternoon. Casey Bartholomew from Stop Waste. We're a JPA in Alameda County. And I had a question/comment. My question was around the local assistant grant program. Specifically, the question is around eligible project activities. We were really encouraged to see that edible food recovery was included in those eligible activities. However, our understanding from jurisdictions is that funding for food recovery equipment, such as cold storage or other needed equipment, as well as pass-through grants to food recovery organizations, were not considered eligible activities in this last round of funding. And so I wanted just to confirm that, if that's the case, and if so, would that be something that you would consider in the next round of funding to make it more accessible for food recovery organizations to get that support?
Thank you so much for that question. So currently right now with the funding for the 60 million, the initial 60 million, the equipment needs to be owned by the grantee. So that's that relationship right now. I think in the future, this is something that we want to consider because we understand, you know, those partnerships are happening, and it's a little difficult for the jurisdiction to own part of that and have that infrastructure. So this is definitely something that we're looking at for the future.
Okay, so the next question looks like it's a follow-up from Rachel Monaco's question, and this is coming from Timothy Burrows. You were unmuted. If you could unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi, everybody. Timothy Burrows with Stop Waste. Good to be with you. Thanks for all this information. I really appreciated Rachel's question. The food recovery organizations are already in a very high demand, and we're seeing in Alameda County now that we're rolling out inspections of food serving businesses with environmental health inspectors, that's actually creating additional increased demand on food recovery organizations, which is the whole idea. Which is a good thing, but definitely noticing that additional capacity is needed. We're doing some local funding for our food recovery organizations in our county. I think some combination of local, state, and other creative funding sources will really be needed. So interested in kind of the long-term trajectory of state funding, and it sounds like we'll be talking about that more at future calls.
Yes, we will be addressing that, as Kara mentioned, in February, and certainly a conversation we look forward to having, and appreciate any input as we're thinking about. I realize this isn't sustainable in long term, this next round of the 180 million as it relates to building that capacity.
If there's nothing further to add, we'll go to the next question from Paul Frond. Paul, you are unmuted on our end. If you'd like to unmute yourself, please state your name, affiliation, and your question regarding compliance reviews.
Great, thank you. Paul Freund from Tehama County. So my question is in regards to that section I referenced there for compliance reviews. I just need a little clarification on the compliance reviews. Say that, all commercial entities that generate 2 cubic yards or more per week of solid waste. But then the next paragraph just below that says that we also have to determine compliance with the organic waste generator requirements as set forth in the section. So would that mean both commercial businesses producing 2 cubic yards and more, as well as commercial businesses producing less than 2 cubic yards, in addition to residential generators? And then just in addition to that, the compliance reviews, which I've seen referred to as desk audits, would also include the generator requirements, organic waste generator requirements, which include commercial businesses' responsibility to have the appropriate containers for collecting those specific materials in those containers. So that seems like it'd be more than just a desk audit as well. But first off, is compliance review going to include commercial businesses producing less than 2 cubic yards as well as residential generators? Or does that paragraph just below section 18995.1 A1 uppercase A1 only refer to the other requirements for commercial generators? Did you get all that?
I think so. Paul, you may have to correct us if we're amiss.
Sure.
Ashley, do you want to help me do you want me to start? Sure. Okay, perfect. So Paul, I was just quickly looking at the reg language, and you may have to help me a little bit. In section B, that's referring to a particular section over in Article 3, which is 18984.3, and that's related to the single unsegregated collection system. So Tehama County is not in that situation.
No,
so
I wasn't, sorry, not
okay.
sorry, 18995.1, lowercase a, number 1, uppercase A, and then just below that, number 1, not in parentheses.
Gotcha. Great. Okay, thank you. Yeah, so there's a few things going on there. So you do have what you have been doing with the businesses that are 2 cubic yards or larger. That is what we do call that desk audit. And there's another part to your question that you asked about,
Yeah, so then does that include the desk audit? Because then it says The jurisdiction shall also determine compliance with organic waste generator requirements as set forth in section 18984.9 parenthesis A and cell pole requirements. So the organic waste generator requirements would mean residential generators as well as commercial generators producing less than 2 cubic yards.
Right. And if you look at 18984.9A, that's that requirement.
Yes, I have that open here.
Yeah, that's that requirement that says that generators have to subscribe to service, or self-haul. And so, you'll notice in your annual report, you had to report on both residential customers as well as commercial customers, right? So you are reporting to CalRecycle and you're keeping in your implementation record all of your different types of generators. And do they have collection service? Have they been waived, depending on what the type of waiver is, et cetera. So there's a couple of things going on there. And your records, you are keeping that record of really all of your generators, residential and commercial. You also are, doing the other types of inspections related to this, which is container contamination minimization, et cetera. So there's a couple of things going on in that paragraph, but you're right. You're still doing that same desk audit you were doing for the 2 cubic yards or more, but you're also tracking that, what's the status of all of your generators, residential and commercial businesses, regardless of size. Ashley?
Do you want to turn to Paul to see if he has any other questions first?
Yeah, no, thank you, Ashley. So why didn't it just state all generators? And why does it have it that confusing? You're doing 2 cubic yards, but then you're also doing all the other generator requirements. It could have just been easier stated, just do a compliance review of all your generators, because that's what I'm trying to determine is how best to do a compliance review. So the only way that we could really determine that is taking a parcel list and matching that up with our hauler data in areas where it's mandatory to have collection, and then seeing where, they align and where they don't, and then finding that as our non-compliant entities. Okay, so that's all right, excellent. Perfect.
And Paul, you bring up a great point. These regulations are really complex and they're really hard to read. Ashley and I have these conversations all the time, and sometimes back and forth, like, okay, now what does this section mean? And we go back and forth. So you're actually bringing up a really, these regs are hard to understand. And that's why we love these webinars, this opportunity for you to ask clarifying questions, and we'll do our best to work our way through it. But yeah, that is what it means. And it, in a more rural community, the way you're determining, the residents that have service, the businesses that have service could be slightly different than in a more urban community. So you may have some slight differences there, like you were talking about with your parcel information.
I would love to hear other ideas on how you would do that. If anybody else has started doing those compliance reviews, I'd love to hear from jurisdictions. So like you said, a peer share, it's good to see what other jurisdictions are doing, because if we don't have to purchase a parcel list, if we could avoid that, if there's another way to do that, but I don't really see, so love to hear other examples out there.
Perfect.
But yeah, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So with Paul's request, that's what this webinar is geared to. While Ashley and I do have some things to share, we do really want this to be peer sharing as well. So if any of you would like to share how you're doing your compliance reviews and determining, how many residents have service, how many don't, et cetera, feel free to put that in the chat and we'll queue you up so you can do that sharing. Paul, thank you so much. We appreciate it. And you've staged what these webinars are about. They really are intended for us to share some of the challenges and questions that you might have, as well as, information that we also want to share with all of you.
The next question is regarding contamination monitoring and grant funding. And this is from Sarah Aaron. You are unmuted on our end. If you unmute yourself, you can go ahead and ask your question.
Hi, thank you. I'm Sarah Ahern with the City of Oxnard. I am the Outreach and Education Specialist. I am also the grant manager for the SB 13 Local Assistance Grant Program funding that we got. I know that one of the items is for compliance inspection enforcement, which includes software and equipment. There's different variations of software depending on what you're getting, and then cameras for the truck. So when you can dump in, you can see if there's contaminant, so you can specifically target outreach to those generators. But it's hard to tell what isn't covered under the grant funding. I understand that it would need to only be organics trucks, but I was wondering if there is any type of like format to kind of follow for that, because it's hard to try to do something and then all of a sudden put a bunch of money out and then have CalRecycle say, oh no, this isn't an approved funding. So I was just kind of curious if there's any guidelines for that.
Sure, Sarah, thank you for your question. So collection truck cameras on trucks used for organics collection would be eligible for OWR 1 and 2. There's not a pre-approved list for software, but if you want to provide a description of the software to your grant manager and pass that by them just to ensure that it's eligible. And if you have other questions, you can run those past your grant manager as well.
Thank you, Michelle.
Sure.
This question comes from Marcus Lee. In terms of grant funding, Marcus, you can go ahead and unmute yourself. Please state your name and affiliation and ask your question. It looks like Marcus is unmuted, but maybe having some difficulties with audio. So I'll go ahead and read the question. It says that Marcus Lee is from Union Sanitary District, and they ask, in terms of grant funding, would a co-digestion study qualify as an applicable option for funding? Our goal is to move towards co-digestion in our anaerobic digesters, but need to evaluate what that would mean for us.
Sure, thank you for your question, Marcus. So it wouldn't be an eligible type of activity for the co-digestion grant program or the organics grant program, but this is definitely something that we want to consider for the feasibility grants. We're developing that criteria right now, and hopefully we'll have that out in the next several months. Thank you.
Okay, we have another question from Kanya Vivanti, and this is about funds and the 3-stream containers. So you are unmuted. If you could unmute yourself and ask your question.
Thank you. Thanks for indulging me again on another question. I wanted to know, I've been told that we cannot use the SB 1383 jurisdictional fund money for three-stream collection units for meeting rooms, inside park facilities, and that it can only be used for recycling and organics. But we're really focused on having 3-stream containers that are attached. That's our goal now, because that's the best way to get people to do it. If it's spread throughout the entire room, it's just not going to happen. And so when I've asked before if I could use the money to purchase these, I was told no, I could not, only for the recycling and the green. And my question is like, why? Because for the beverage container money, you can, but this one I was told you cannot, because I have purchased with beverage container money 3 streams for public events that we have connected together that require the public. They're all right there with pictures and everything. We want to do a similar type of thing, but nicer ones for indoors, because we have a lot of city indoor meeting rooms at our various parks, and our center 2-story banquet building and all that jazz. So I just like some clarification, because I was really hoping, to outfit all of our city buildings with those 3 streams with that funding source. So if anybody can comment on that, let me know. I know.
For sure. So with the other programs, the beverage container grant allows for litter abatement because that's in statute. And so right now it's not something that's allowed with that current program, but I don't know if Kara has anything to add to that. I can talk to my team a little bit more.
Yeah, Konya, Michelle's kind of nailed it. We drew some lines. These are supposed to be grants for 13-free implementation, and we did not feel that using the money towards any purchase of the gray container would be eligible. Now, with that said, I think it would be worth a conversation to see if 2/3 of the total cost could be funded through the grant. And I'm going to not speak out of turn and say I think that would be reasonable, but I think that's reasonable. So Michelle, I'll turn it back to you.
Yeah, I definitely think that that's something that I can talk to my team about and that we could consider.
Well, a lot of these units, because I've seen some of them at CRRA and I've gotten information, they're like one big unit with separation in it.
Totally.
And, it kind of defeats the purpose, I think.
I do hear you, but I think the only thing we could offer you is, so for example, say that that one system, say, is $100, right? What I'm suggesting that Michelle will talk to her team about is, could you use your grant funds for 2/3 of that $100? And so that would give you some of the funding needed, and you would have to make up the rest. But we have drawn the line. I completely understand your points, but we had to draw the line somewhere with eligible activities. But that is something that we could look into if you would like us to.
Yeah, I really would. I hate to have to go to my council and say, we got all this money, but the state's not allowing me to use any of it for the trash part. And now we expect that little section of it to be much smaller than the other two sections, right? So I really would appreciate if you could maybe consider that for the second round, that be changed, because they're going to have a hard time with the nexus between that and the beverage container funds that we get. Why were we able to do it with that and not with this? And, if we really want to educate and train our community, our residents, the public, it all has to be all together. And, we all want it to look exactly the same. And I really feel that that money should be able to be used for that, if that's the kind of system you're buying. We wanted all one big unit, one big, and so I think it's kind of shooting us in the foot. So it's kind of disappointing, because I don't want to spend general fund money for that.
For sure. Thank you so much for that feedback. And I think it's something that we can actually look at for the current grants. Thank you.
Thanks. Before we go to the next question or go for a break, I would just like to note that we were prioritizing funding questions for this session. There will be another Q&A session towards the end, and we'll go back to some of those questions that we might have passed to get through those specifics. Carrie, do we have time for one other question? Or would you like to take one? Okay. Our next question comes from Mia Hoffman. Mia Hoffman, if you could go ahead and unmute yourself, state your name and affiliation, and ask your question.
Hi, everyone. I'm Maya Hoffman. I work with the City of Santa Maria. My question is about compostable plastic bags. I was wondering if you guys have a list of the facilities in California that do accept compostable plastic bags. The compost facility we have here in Santa Maria, Engel and Gray, they do not. And we're kind of concerned that without allowing our residents and commercial businesses to use plastic or compostable plastic bags, that our participation is always going to be lower than what it could be, even, with enforcement actions and other things like that. So I'm just wondering if CalRecycle maybe has any plans to help jurisdictions with compostable plastic bag issues, or of course, opening up to the group if anybody else has any recommendations.
Yeah, Maya, thank you for that question. We didn't have any plans to post a list of the facilities across California that are accepting compostable plastic bags, although we are getting that information through the annual report, so that we could maybe, as we're developing what reports we're going to put up on the website, that might be something we could do, and you could certainly get that information. And the regs were specifically designed to really allow facilities to dictate as far as bags, compostable plastics, what they can and cannot handle. You know, and maybe if there's anyone in the group who's had a facility that has invested in the equipment to be able to open those bags or deal with them. Compostable plastics, you know, really across the state, and depending on the compost facility, we're finding numerous challenges with those. But if there's anyone today whose facility takes and processes compostable plastic bags and has a little bit more insight on that, and I know some are saying best to avoid compostable plastic, but if anyone wants to share, we'd love to hear from you. Ashley?
Thanks, Kara. So I do have some statistics based off of the self-reported April 1st report. I don't have the facility names, but from our count, about 97 jurisdictions in their report had said that they allow compostable plastics in their green container. So that's out of about 613 jurisdictions that should have submitted their April 1st report. About 97 said that they would accept that. In terms of plastic bags, I know it's not compostable, but in terms of plastic bags in their green container, about 150 the 613 jurisdictions said that they do accept it. So hopefully that helps. So there are some in some jurisdictions in California, but like not tons out of the 613 that we oversee. And then we're still processing your guys' October 3rd electronic annual report, which will also have that information, which Kara was alluding to about if we could have reports created. So all that April 1st data, we did it by hand this time around.
Thank you, Ashley. We had one more question come in regarding funding that I think we could get to before breaking. The question comes from Jack Steinman. Jack, I'd like to go ahead and unmute yourself. You're unmuted on our end.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. I was just wondering if there was any information your team could share about the length of time folks will have to spend the next round of grant funding. I know my team, we prefer a little extra time, maybe more than this last round if possible. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Jack. So our typical grant term is about 2 years. So that's probably what we will consider for this next round of funding as well.
That clarified everything. I think now's a good time to go ahead and take 5 minutes. Oh, Jack, did you have something else to say?
Thank you. I muted myself too soon. I would just say if for a team that's looking at using funds for something like food recovery grant funding or to help support staffing at food recovery groups to run their operations. If there was a way to extend how long we could stretch those grant funds, it could be really useful. I don't know if that's something my team's going to pursue, but it could make a lot of sense if we have multiple years to really make every one of those dollars count as we figure out more long-term sustainable funding options for food recovery.
For sure. Thank you for that feedback.
Right now, I think we'll go ahead and take that 5-minute break. If there's any closing remarks? If not, we'll see you back at 2:10 and resume the webinar. Thank you, everyone. We had a number of comments in the chat pane regarding contamination monitoring and some really interesting ideas on how different jurisdictions are implementing programs and different ways to mitigate those issues. Marie Knutson with Republic, if you'd like to unmute yourself and state some of the insights that you brought to the chat pane, you're unmuted on our end.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you, Marie.
Okay.
Yes, we've ran into some challenges with multifamily units. Those are going fine, but the ones that are unique are multifamily units that have residents with individual accounts, and the multifamily unit HOA is more of a figurehead and does not want to manage strategically placed organics carts. Yet it's difficult because the residents are seniors, and giving out individual carts to a formerly yard waste exempt residents means an added cost of a fair amount. So that part is difficult. The other part is how to track it if they do decide to share between neighbors and attach it only to, say, one residential account. How do you track that for CalRecycle?
Hey, Marie, that is a challenging situation. I do want to invite everyone attending, if anyone has a similar situation and they want to share how they're tackling it, Ray will keep an eye out because we'd love to do some sharing. I think first and foremost, we did put into the regulations that the property owner, and that, I'm not sure the relationship with the HOA, has certain responsibilities. And so I think we do have to explain to the HOA that they have responsibilities for ensuring adequate containers, access to containers, and all of those other tasks associated. I think when it comes to keeping track, we really looked, and we've had a number of conversations with jurisdictions about that piece, and we really leave it to you as far as what makes sense for you in tracking the customers, and how, if it's a group, it happens more with commercial businesses when there's like a strip mall and there's really just one account holder and there are multiple businesses that utilize those containers and that account. So there's a lot of flexibility. We'd be happy to do a follow-up with you and strategize more. But Ray, do we have anyone today that would like to share how they're dealing with similar situations with HOAs?
No, not yet. Keeping an eye to see if anybody is. Nothing yet on HOAs or MFDs. It looks like we might have something from Basil. Basil, you can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yeah, I mean, something similar that we've been doing is just putting it on the responsibility of the property owner or whoever is responsible to pay the bills for that. I know, like you're saying, like maybe like a strip mall, there might be only one customer that might be using it, but we still try to put it on the property manager. So that's kind of, it's been working. We've only had maybe one customer really kind of give us any pushback on that, but we do strive to try to work with them as best as we can as far as trying to set something up for that one customer, but still maybe the property owner will then just bill that customer directly for that if they're the only ones that are using it. So that's kind of how we've been doing it, and that's kind of how we've been told to do it. So it's been working so far. So
thank you. And Kanya, I see that your hand is up, so if you can unmute yourself if you have anything to add.
Yeah, we follow kind of what Basil is doing, and we put it on the property owner. And if they've got a 15 unit or a 6 unit, they have to provide that service, and we go back and forth with them. But ultimately, we tell them, well, you're going to have to pay for it. If that means you're going to have to increase their rent by $5, $10, whatever that's going to be, you have to comply with it unless you apply for a waiver. You have to do it. So that's kind of where we're at. I haven't had too much pushback on that. But I've been trying to do presentations to the HOAs and meeting with the property managers, and also offering them any time to have a table with questions for the residents in the evenings or on the weekends. I've been speaking at senior facilities and kind of doing some games with them and providing kitchen caddies and you know, I've been a couple of times doing that, and I offer that business assistance to all of our commercial multifamily clients. So that seems to kind of help. They don't all take me up on it, but just offering it to them and letting them know that I'm available even on the weekends and after hours, what's best for their residents or their employees. That's what I offered, and it seems to have helped.
Hopefully that helped. We do have a couple comments in here regarding waste characterizations from Lori Sweetser, as well as Tanya Flores. If either of you two would like to unmute yourself, we can go ahead and get that conversation started. Go ahead, Larry, you're unmuted.
Yeah, hello, this is Larry Sweetser. I'm a consultant for the Environmental Services Joint Powers Authority, 26 rural counties. I work with you staff a lot. Do have a lot of other questions. Mine's not so much a waste characterization, but it's the landfill status impact reports that are due in January. And I've been hearing different and conflicting information on what's supposed to be in there, particularly on item 2 on the waste types and volumes. In terms of the regulation only says we have to provide information for the landfill on waste types and volumes, but there's been some discussion and some indication that what's requested is more elaborate waste characterization, essentially on all waste types going into the landfill, especially the organics. That's not something a landfill typically has available. All we really track at a scale is yard waste, maybe a few other types of organic waste streams. It's not a detailed waste characterization, and that seems to be what's being expected. I have talked to other staff that seem to indicate it's more just information you need, but there seems to be a lot of conflicting information about what is required to be reported in the reports. We don't have time to do a characterization. And there's also a request in the guidance document to provide more information on the future tonnages, which landfills don't have any idea what they're going to expect. They don't always have franchise agreements or a contract with jurisdictions to even know what's going on in the jurisdiction to make that a reasonable prediction. So that information would just be a guess that they're coming up with. It really has doubtful beneficial use in there. So I think the guidance document needs some clarification on what's supposed to be in that report really, and we're running out of time to do that.
Yeah. Hey, Larry, thank you for bringing that up. We will set up a follow-up with you and our experts who deal with the SERS. So we'll make sure we do a follow-up with you.
Okay.
Thanks so much.
Looks like we have Marcus willing to participate. Oh, Marcus with CalRecycle. Marcus, you can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Perfect, thanks. And I was just going to say, Kara, I could speak on that a little bit if you'd like, just being part of that group.
Yeah, go ahead, Marcus. And then I do think a follow-up specifically with Larry is going to be important. So thank you.
Perfect. Yeah, so I could talk to Martin. That's something we could definitely set up internally. I was just going to say, Larry, I'm not sure if you've spoken to our our engineering support branch specifically, but they'll definitely be the ones doing the majority of that review of the status impact report. So regarding what guidance was posted and what they might really be looking for that particular section, it might be good to speak to them. But that'll be Robert Healy or Janelle with our group. But yeah, like Kara said, that's something we could definitely look into setting up to give you a better answer.
We do have another hand raised, Tanya Flores. If you could unmute yourself, if you have anything to add.
Thank you. So yeah, my question was along Larry's in terms of the waste characterizations. So I'm with the City of LA. We have transfer stations and compost facilities that we need to do this for. So I was just wondering if CalRecycle is working with the local enforcement agencies to kind of help us comply with everything, make sure that we're good to go. I know it's part of the RDRS system that was recently added. So I was hoping you guys can provide a little bit more info in regards to that, as well as mentioning AB 1985 and how that's gonna affect everyone meeting their procurement targets. Thank you.
Marcus, you want to jump in again on the LEA interaction? Uh-oh, is that Marcus?
There
Oh,
we
you
go. That works.
It was the
better.
add-on.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so we actually have been working pretty closely with LEAs, as well as our internal enforcement branch, as far as making sure LEAs really do have all they need to figure out if measurements are being done correctly. I'll post a link in the chat, but our regulation implementation webpage, we have posted several guidance documents that really outline that overall process, and it's based on material types. So there's measurements for mixed waste streams, source separated streams, all the streams coming out of compost and in-vessel streams. We also have measurement videos available that really break down that process. Just based on a meeting we had this afternoon, our enforcement branch will be working with LEAs a little more closely, just based on some of the data we received in that first initial report. So we'll be at least working with certain LEAs a little more closely and probably throughout statewide eventually, just to make sure everyone has those requirements down. So it is an ongoing process, I would say.
And regarding AB 1985, we will be coming out with some information pretty soon. Zoe, do you want to talk a little bit?
That was exactly what I was going to say. We do understand the need to provide guidance to you all on 1985. As you know, it goes into effect at the first of the year, and we will be getting information out to you all shortly and can announce it at the next webinar, hopefully, or and we'll also be getting out some through our listserv.
All right, Ray, is this a good point for us to move on? And then we'll come back to doing some more sharing.
Yes, that sounds like an excellent idea.
All right.
Pass it to you.
Great. Ashley, welcome to join me. Ashley and I are going to be sharing a few updates. First, I'm going to be talking about the mandatory commercial recycling, mandatory commercial organics recycling formal plans. We have had a lot of questions on that. I'm going to talk a little bit about the local assistance branches, site visits with jurisdictions, and then Ashley's going to be also doing some sharing about what's going on with enforcement. So I'll dive in, and then we will continue to do sharing. And thank you all so much. You have done exactly what we hoped this webinar would be, which is asking clarifying questions and the sharing and problem solving. So this is just what we want it to be. So thank you so much. So just to get into mandatory commercial recycling, mandatory commercial organics recycling, as Rachel shared earlier, this is to implement this law is a partnership between us at CalRecycle and all of our local governments, our industry, our nonprofits. It's going to take all of us together to really address our climate crisis. As you all know, CalRecycle is responsible for overseeing how well our jurisdictions are doing and implementing their programs. And our team does this in a variety of ways. We conduct site visits, we look at annual reports and other documentation. We have a responsibility as a department to conduct at any time reviews to make sure that our cities and counties are implementing the mandatory commercial recycling, mandatory commercial organics recycling requirements. We've been reviewing each city and county's implementation since these laws were enacted. CalRecycle has to review the jurisdiction's actions to implement its program and determine if a good faith effort, meaning all reasonable and feasible efforts, have been made. And this includes the number of businesses that are complying with these laws. Looking forward, it's also important to acknowledge the links between compliance with these two laws, as well as compliance with SB 1383. CalRecycle, as I mentioned, has been evaluating each jurisdiction's compliance because full compliance with these two laws is so vitally important as a stepping stone to being compliant with SB 1383. In fact, a jurisdiction cannot comply with SB 1383 regulations if it's not in compliance with AB 341 and AB 1826. And by this, I mean, if we don't have collection service being provided to all of the regulated businesses, that's also a requirement under SB 1383. An express benchmark for compliance with these two laws is clear that all businesses generating the statutory levels of waste must have service or an applicable waiver. And given that the state is still not meeting our statutory goals, organic waste disposal is more than doubled rather than halved since 2014. And given the majority of California's waste originates from commercial sources, it's time for additional measures beyond just monitoring and outreach for these two programs. CalRecycle is expecting jurisdictions to step up their efforts to account for businesses that are by law required to have recycling services or a local waiver. So for those jurisdictions that still have regulated businesses that are not complying, CalRecycle has been moving those jurisdictions further down the path of compliance to ensure that 100% of the remaining covered businesses are either provided collection service or issued a waiver. So I'd like to clarify that when I use the term mandatory service, it's very important that covered businesses are provided the right amount of service so that they don't have to dispose of organic waste, and that they're also provided education and training so they're properly source separating. It doesn't mean dropping off a container and running. As a part of the anytime review process, affected jurisdictions have been submitting formal plans to CalRecycle. These plans lay out how the jurisdictions will address using their actions and timelines, and how they will ensure that all of the regulated businesses are brought into compliance. The jurisdictions submitted formal plans because they're implementing portions of the program, but we're still seeing those levels of non-compliance. And this is a demonstration of a failure to make all those reasonable and feasible efforts. Jurisdictions across the state are implementing their formal plans if they're required to do so. And we have some rural jurisdictions, for example, that are exempt from mandatory commercial organics recycling. This is so important at this time if we're going to hit our targets, particularly our 2025 target, to hit that reduction in methane emissions. We have to all be moving forward and getting businesses to comply and not only just subscribing, but actually putting things in the right containers. To date, we have over 150 jurisdictions that have fully implemented collection for their businesses. And we have many more that are on track to do so by the end of the year. We also have jurisdictions that their plans go into next year, and they're focusing not just on the businesses that are subject to mandatory commercial recycling and mandatory commercial organics recycling, but they're focused on all commercial businesses. Jurisdictions are taking a variety of approaches. We're seeing that some are implementing, which is a requirement of 1383, they're implementing ordinances that specify recycling and organics recycling collection as a mandatory service, and they're including enforcement provisions in those ordinances. Some jurisdictions are rolling out mandatory collection service to all their covered businesses. Basically, they're letting them know by a certain date if they have not signed up for service with the jurisdiction will be contacting them, assessing the right amount of service, providing education, and they will start providing that service. Our local assistance staff, as well as Ashley's branch in our jurisdiction assistance compliance group, has also been monitoring these jurisdictions. Sorry, I stumbled there and I totally messed up. Jurisdiction and Agency Compliance and Enforcement Branch. We call it JACE, and now you know why, because it's a mouthful. So I mentioned earlier that if at any time our staff finds that a jurisdiction has not made adequate progress on implementing their plan or has not otherwise addressed its program gaps, then our staff refer and recommend that jurisdiction be prioritized for a compliance evaluation to be conducted by the Jurisdiction and Agency Compliance and Enforcement Branch, JACE, and that's Ashley's branch. I'd like to share a little bit about the local assistance branches focus in the coming year. First, I would like to mention that our two branches work very close together. Our management teams meet weekly. Ashley and I feel like are constantly talking to each other, and our teams are really working closely together. We really believe in this continuum between assistance and enforcement. Our focus is providing compliance assistance first and using enforcement when it's needed. Our local assistance team is meeting with each of their jurisdictions through the next year. If you haven't been contacted by your local assistance liaison, please reach out to them. Our focus is to ensure that jurisdictions are making progress to comply with the requirements, both for AB 341, AB 1826, and SB 1383, and to assist if there are any gaps, and to continue providing any needed technical assistance. Ashley and I and our teams understand that these regulations can be very confusing, so our goal is to provide clarity as well as that assistance. The local assistance team will be going over a jurisdiction's program implementation in an effort to help our jurisdictions to be successful in complying with these requirements. Now, I'd like to invite Ashley to share a bit more about the status of enforcement activities, and then we'll open it up to more sharing. Ashley?
Thanks, Kara. Well, I really can't follow Kara, as you guys all know from Kara's multiple years of speaking to you guys. But I do want to give you an update of my branch, the Jurisdiction and Agency Compliance and Enforcement branch. So as Kara mentioned, we are a mouthful to say, and we're a new branch. So we were just established in June this year. And so I just want to share a little bit of what my branch is currently working on and what we're working on for the future. And then in upcoming webinars, you'll hear even more about what the enforcement side is doing here at CalRecycle for the jurisdictions and the state agencies. So as most of you know about SB 619, that is one of our main focuses right now in JACE. So as you guys know, if you've heard me say it before or at public meetings, about 128 jurisdictions were approved for SB 619 or Notice of Intent to Comply. That gave these jurisdictions a fast track to get on a corrective action plan. My team right now is working with all of these jurisdictions to establish this corrective action plan. And in the upcoming weeks, I'm hoping maybe within the next week or two, those 128 jurisdictions will be notified by the staff that they're working with on what's coming up next. And basically it's saying that we're about to finalize this corrective action plan, and here's the schedule that you would follow for your check-ins with all of us. The next thing that we'll be also doing is we'll start compliance evaluations on jurisdictions. So as Kara mentioned, her team goes out and focuses on assistance and to get you guys to comply with SB 1383. And really this is before my team comes out and does these compliance evaluations. So what we're working on right now is we're creating that process on the compliance evaluations. And as Kara mentioned, we're starting to prioritize jurisdictions. And one of the criteria that we are using, as Kara mentioned also, was compliance with 341 and 1826 or MCR and more. But please also note, and I know I've said this before, that jurisdictions will get a compliance evaluation at least once every 4 years. So even if it's not this year or next year, there will be compliance evaluations for every jurisdiction in California at least once every 4 years. Kara made mention of the formal MCR and more plans. Some of those plans do get extended as long as jurisdictions are letting us know why and giving us a reasonable amount of time. There could be some barriers that they come across. However, if it is time for a compliance evaluation, we still may do one on a jurisdiction, even though they have a formal plan. However, as Kara said, her and I talk pretty frequently, and we'll make that decision together on, is this the right time for a compliance evaluation for a jurisdiction, or is it not because something just happened? There could be a hiccup with maybe a franchise agreement or maybe a facility, etc. So Kara and I do have that constant communication. So please keep Kara and her team in the loop of what's going on with your jurisdiction. The last forum I spoke at, I told the jurisdictions that Kara and her team are your best friends. They should be your speed dial for any questions that you guys have, and they could provide that clarity and assistance that's needed to get you guys to implement SB 1383 in a successful manner. And an efficient manner. Kara and her team are great at making recommendations also. The last thing that my team is doing right now is those October 3rd electronic annual review reports. So we are currently reviewing those. Those also help us determine prioritization. And so one of the biggest things is, right, MCR more numbers were in that report. So if we notice that it's not 100% and there is no reason why, Kara's team doesn't know, that could validate a reason for us to come out and do a compliance evaluation. Or if the resolutions weren't turned in, or ordinances, sorry, if the ordinances weren't turned in, that could be another reason why we may need to come out sooner than later. So again, if you're struggling with your ordinance, your MCR more, please contact Kara's team and they'll get you on the right path going forward. With that said, I think we have less than 20 minutes left. So I do want to turn it over to questions, but there is more to come. Mark, DeBee, and I are very committed of being transparent in our enforcement process. So as we're building it, as we're starting to implement it, you will see more things coming out from us. Like hopefully in the next webinar, I'll talk more about what you'll see in a compliance evaluation. One thing that we are working on right now is how do we even notify you? So we're hoping to send you a letter that we're going to do a compliance evaluation, and then we're hoping to send another letter sometime after that asking for that implementation record. So we're trying to work with all the jurisdictions within the timelines of the regulations. So if you do have feedback on any of the enforcement process, please let me know. We're always open to hearing your comments, questions, concerns. So with that, I'll turn it back to Ray for any questions that anyone has.
Thank you, Ashley. First of all, we would like to note that Janelle would like to give the contact information. It's janelle.heinzler@calrecycle.ca.gov for any questions regarding status impact reports. Thank you for that, Janelle. I'll spell that JANELLE.HEINZLER@calrecycle.ca.gov. We do have a request from Jack Johnson for non-compliant accounts that are being assessed for mandating services. Jack, you're unmuted on our end if you'd like to elaborate on your request and see if we have any jurisdictions here that can offer some assistance with that.
Hi, everybody. It was just it was to Kara. She mentioned that there were, well, she said there were 150 of something, and then I think a smaller number of jurisdictions who were actually assessing non-compliant accounts and mandating service at the appropriate level. All I'm asking is for some contact information for jurisdictions like that. I've been suggesting that in my jurisdiction since the 1826 mandates kicked up, and have been getting pushback from council that it's not legal. I am not a lawyer. I don't pretend to be. But if there are other jurisdictions who have found a path forward to do that, I would love to contact them, find out how they did it, and then present it to my council, because it is by far the simplest way to get to 100% compliance. Because I've been knocking on doors and making phone calls, and we've made a lot of progress, but it has not gotten us, well, we're down to 23, so I'm proud of that, but it's not 100%. Do you understand what I mean? Thank you.
Yeah, we'd be happy to follow up with you. There may be some jurisdictions today, so I'd love to hear from them if they've rolled out collection service to all of their regulated businesses or those that are subject to mandatory commercial recycling. A couple of thoughts, and I think, you know, both Ashley and I are here to help you. So if there's a conversation that you'd like me to be a part of with the city council or legal counsel, we also have a great team member. Our legal counsel is very willing to speak to other legal counsels. So
Okay.
Jack, anything we can do to help you, because I think it's a really important, with SB 1383, it's a foundational requirement to provide mandatory collection service. It is foundational, right? And so the enforcement ordinances that jurisdictions pass should be allowing for that authority. But, you know, we have run across some situations with existing franchise agreements and the ordinance piece. So there could be some things that need to be worked through. So love to schedule a follow-up with you on that, because I do get it. There are some challenges. This is a huge paradigm shift. I feel like I've been saying that for a number of years now through this regulatory process, but this is a huge, big shift. And it's a big shift on not only getting services provided, but it's a big shift on getting residents and businesses and all of us, right, to be properly recycling and not just continuing to throw these materials into the containers. That is going to take us more time, right, to get residents and businesses to really be doing what we need them to do. And that's going to take time. And we're all in this together and really supporting each other. At the monthly meeting yesterday, our Office of Public Affairs rolled out some new pieces for organic waste recycling. It's really catchy, has a cool like rap tune, etc. But we will be rolling out more of those materials to jurisdictions to help you with your residents. And then if there's anything, we are going to be at next month's webinar, spending some time talking about and sharing how we're dealing with commercial recycling. We've been collecting some really great educational resources from various jurisdictions, and we're beginning that up on our educational tool page. So to do some more sharing, because I really feel like the only way we're all going to achieve this is by sharing with each other and what's working, how are we overcoming challenges, and not reinventing the wheel. So Jack, I hope that's helpful.
It is, Kara. You've been helpful for the past 4.5 years with me. So thank you very much.
You bet. You bet. We will be sure to circle back to you.
And I'm going to get my LA on it too.
Yeah, perfect. That would be
Thank
great.
you.
Yeah, thank you. I don't know, Ray, did anyone have any?
Yes, Cinchi Tan with Zero Waste Sonoma pointed that in Stop Waste. Oh, I can't hear you, Kara. Kara, I couldn't hear you if you were saying something.
I wasn't. I just, if we can do some of that sharing, that would be awesome.
Perfect. Yeah, so Cinchi Tan with Zero Waste Sonoma pointed out that in Stop Waste latest board packet, that they are sending out notice of violations and penalties in January. If anyone with Stop Waste is on, please go ahead and raise your hand if you're willing to share. In the meantime, we have JC Bolden with SCS Engineers would like some further clarification on the mandatory collection piece that you mentioned. JC, you are unmuted on our end if you'd like to go ahead and contribute.
Great, thanks. Hi, Kara and Ashley and everybody. Kara, did I understand you when you mentioned mandatory collection and foundational? Is that to be interpreted as every jurisdiction is expected to have adopted and implemented mandatory collection service?
Yes and no. The regulations do allow jurisdictions to provide for self-haul. So in some of our more rural communities, Nevada County, for example, they are allowing some generators to self-haul, and they're implementing their enforcement ordinance and monitoring at the transfer stations to ensure that folks are properly sorting and separating. So there is some variations. In general, we're talking about mandatory collection service, but again, there is some allowance for self-hauling.
Okay, so it sounds like expected and almost required in urban areas, but if you're an unincorporated county, for example, and you have rural areas, so like Nevada County, then they don't have to have mandatory collection by their contracted haulers, but it's mandatory upon the generators to separate those materials.
Correct. And I'll have Ashley talk a little bit about this, but what we've communicated to jurisdictions on this topic is that what CalRecycle is going to be doing when we conduct that compliance evaluation, we are going to be evaluating how you are enforcing your ordinance, right? And ensuring that self-haulers are managing material and taking it to the proper facilities. And again, that could be that you have monitoring, right, at the facilities where self-haulers are bringing materials to. So education, for example. So we will be looking at how jurisdictions are enforcing, but there are certainly circumstances throughout the state where, self-hauling jurisdiction decides self-hauling is, the right approach, and the regulations do provide for that. And if you have a particular situation, I'm happy to, if you'd like to follow up with the local assistance liaison, and we can set up a call and talk through any particular circumstances, happy to do that too.
Super, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we're going to pass it over to Rachel Balsley that has some information to share with the Stop Waste efforts. So you're unmuted on our end. If you can unmute yourself, and feel free to add.
Hi, everyone. Rachel Bosley, Senior Program Manager at Stop Waste. Yes, as was mentioned in the chat, we have started sending out some notices of violation for lack of recycling or organics collection service. Our local ordinance did allow for that early enforcement prior to 2024. I know some other jurisdictions do not have that ability based on their local ordinance. So I think we're targeting particular accounts that we think are those organic generators and probably not likely to be eligible for waivers. I also, though, wanted to put out there that I still think that there, I really want to encourage, more discussion and dialogue about this 100% compliance expectation. I really feel that the last 10 to 15% of accounts can consume, 50 times the effort of maybe the first, amount. And CalRecycle has used enforcement discretion on other areas, such as procurement, for instance. So I do think that is worthy of more discussion and collaboration, particularly our bigger cities who have been working at this for 15, 20 years. So I don't think it's for lack of trying that, the getting them that service does not mean they're going to use it. And so that's what we're ultimately, I think, all of us want to see is that diversion from the landfill. So just want to encourage more discussion on that point. Thanks.
Rachel, thank you so much. And I've so appreciated all of my conversations with you. I think as we continue with these webinars, I think this is the forum to do that sharing. As Ashley mentioned, as we start developing and sharing our enforcement processes and compliance evaluation, that's going to be also another forum to give us your thoughts and feedback. I don't know what the end result will be, but I think the conversation is really important. And, we have both Rachel and Mark and Zoe on, and I know they appreciate hearing this feedback, and it helps to inform us because some of this is very new for all of us and what's going to work. Because you're absolutely right. The goal is, we have to hit our targets. We have to get this waste out of the landfill. It's imperative. I personally lose sleep about the existential threat of climate change in front of us. And this is something that we can all be doing. So together. So I appreciate continued conversations on that, because I get it. That last, 5, 10, 15% of businesses, they're like the really tough ones. And I think, we have to see like some of the measures that Stop Waste is starting to take with enforcement. Will that actually work? I mean, it is something to be seen. And certainly CalRecycle is most interested in working with jurisdictions. And we do understand some of the constraints that you face. And that will certainly, I think, be a part of our process going forward. So thanks.
Well, we have you, Rachel. Paul Freund with Tehama County had a question regarding the Stop Waste compliance reviews. Paul, you're unmuted if you'd like to ask your question, or I can go ahead and convey that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I was reading in that board report that was sent by the link, and I saw that how you're getting the remaining non-compliant accounts of 2 cubic yards or more. But after the previous discussion we had a little earlier, there's what do you like? How are you identifying less than 2 cubic yards, and or just doing the compliance reviews to ensure? I'm assuming in Alameda County, mandatory collection is already the case in the whole county, whereas in Tehama County, we have large sections of the county that don't have mandatory collection. So we're really focusing on compliance over the areas that have mandatory collection. And that's where we thought, if we could compare parcels to account data. But I'm curious what you've done to determine compliance in regards to that. That makes sense. I don't know if Rachel can unmute. No.
There we go. I think I was waiting for someone to unmute me. Thank you. Yeah, so in our county, it's a little complicated because we don't handle any of the franchises ourselves. Our member cities do.
Same here.
Yeah, 17 member cities, but we built into our local ordinance that we can get hauler data at least 4 times a year. So we have a database that we custom program to help us manage who's the service level data of all the 10 haulers that operate in our county. And that essentially we're able to then calculate what their weekly total service is. So whether they meet the 2 cubic yard threshold or they don't. And so then we have these tiered efforts. Our ordinance does require that everyone have the service, but I think the mandatory service that term is being used in a couple different ways. So we are not, most of our jurisdictions are not auto enrolling in that mandated way, but they are requiring it. And so we're going on that path of enforcement for the selected accounts, which will be ready by 2024 to do to any non-compliant accounts, because that's required by the regs. But those lower ones, we are deprioritizing because we want to make sure that the 2 cubic yard and above covered by 1826 are targeted first, but know that, we'll have to be going after those smaller accounts. And, some of our broad outreach also is suggesting waivers for some of those counts that might be below the 2 cubic yards and possibly be eligible for that. So I hope that I'm happy to put my email in the chat too for separate follow-up, because our board meeting that I'm going to give this update to starts at 3, so I'm going to have to sign off. But I'll put my email in the chat before I go. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, I definitely, I'd love to email you and talk with you more about that, because we've been doing the same thing for 341. We gather the data from the haulers and figure out the 4 cubic. But the main thing is just trying to match that up with who doesn't have service and how do we find that out? I appreciate that. Thank you.
All right, thank you both. I think with that it's now a good time to pass it back to Deputy Director Zoe for final remarks.
Thank you, Ray. And, I just want to thank everybody for your participation and questions today. This was our first 1383 chat, and probably much like you, we didn't know what to expect. And I just think so much of today's discussion demonstrated that you're all looking for solutions to identify how we can collectively achieve our goals. You know, the organic waste diversion goal is important, but our climate goals are even more important. And I'm just thrilled with the questions. I realize we didn't get to everybody, and that there are a number of unanswered questions in the chat. That's why we're going to have these every month, so we can commit to robust discussion, both with us, but also the information that you all are sharing with each other. So our next webinar will be December 21st at 1 p.m. As Kara mentioned, one of our topics will be commercial recycling. We're also going to be talking a little bit more about our enforcement process and provide any grant updates as they're available. So we really look forward to seeing you all there. If you have questions between now and then, or just in general, our SLCP inbox is a great place to direct those. You also have many of our contact information, and we're always here to help out to the best of our ability as well. So feel free to reach out if you have any ideas for agenda topics, or anything that you would like to discuss at these upcoming meetings. So thanks again for your participation today, and we'll see you next month.